The Dead Sea Scrolls transformed biblical understanding and are some of the earliest versions of the Hebrew Scriptures.
They're getting more out of languages that have already been translated, where there is something for the AI to work on. A fully developed script which nobody can read.
For 70 years, scholars struggled to piece together the world's most mysterious manuscripts. From dating biblical texts with stunning accuracy to decoding hidden mathematical patterns, quantum AI has shattered long-held assumptions. Join us as we reveal what these ancient texts are finally telling us and why it matters now. The discovery that shook history. In 1947, a group of Bedouin shepherds stumbled upon something unexpected in a cave near Qumran, not far from the Dead Sea. Inside, they found ancient clay jars filled with brittle scrolls, fragments of writing that would eventually reshape our understanding of early Judaism, the Bible, and the ancient world. Over the next decade, more than 900 documents would be uncovered across 11 nearby caves, forming what we now call the Dead Sea Scrolls, one of the most important archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. But what exactly are these scrolls? They include nearly every type of writing from the time: copies of Hebrew Bible texts, apocryphal works, prayers, laws, hymns, and sectarian rules. Some manuscripts are nearly complete. Others are tiny, charred remnants the size of a postage stamp. Most were written on parchment or papyrus, with a few inscribed on copper. The scrolls date from roughly 250 BCE to 70 CE and are written primarily in Hebrew, with some in Aramaic and Greek. Many were carefully stored in clay jars, hidden deep in the desert caves. At first, the significance of the discovery wasn't clear, but as scholars began to analyze the texts, it became evident. These were not just old writings, they were time capsules. Some scrolls contained the oldest known versions of biblical books. Others revealed beliefs and practices that had been lost to time. They opened a window into a society living in religious and political tension, a world on the brink of transformation. The origin of the scrolls remains a subject of debate. The most popular theory is that they were written and preserved by the Essenes, a Jewish sect that lived a monastic life near Qumran. They followed strict rules and believed in an imminent apocalypse. Another theory suggests the scrolls came from libraries in Jerusalem, hidden in caves during times of war. A third possibility, the scrolls reflect a variety of Jewish groups from the Second Temple period, each contributing to a shared spiritual and intellectual world. What makes the Dead Sea Scrolls so valuable is not just their age, but their message. They show that Scripture wasn't static, it was alive, debated, edited, and evolving. The texts challenge modern assumptions about the Bible's development, offering alternate versions of familiar stories and prophecies that diverge from later Orthodox interpretations. For decades, researchers studied the fragments by hand, trying to piece together this ancient puzzle, but many remained unreadable, burned, broken, or too faded to interpret. Now, with the help of advanced tools like quantum AI, we're seeing the scrolls in a new light. These aren't just artifacts, they're messages preserved through centuries, waiting to be understood. Today, the Dead Sea Scrolls are not just relics of a lost age. They're keys to understanding how religious texts evolved, how ancient communities lived, and how tradition and innovation shaped the roots of two major world religions. Introduction of quantum, AI, and Enoch. The Dead Sea Scrolls have always presented a mystery too vast for any one person to solve. Thousands of fragile fragments, many barely legible, scattered across centuries, written in ancient languages by unknown hands. For decades, scholars did everything they could, painstakingly cataloging, comparing, speculating. But the scale of the problem was simply too large. The fragments tell little, broken, eroded, incomplete. That changed with the arrival of quantum AI and a system known as Enoch. Enoch was not just another piece of software. It was a purpose-built quantum-powered AI designed to read ancient texts with a level of nuance and precision that no human or traditional computer could match. It was trained to do what the most seasoned historian does: interpret meaning, detect patterns, and connect context. But Enoch could do it in seconds, with access to exponentially more data points than any scholar could process in a lifetime. At its core, Enoch was fueled by quantum computing. Unlike classical machines, which process one possibility at a time, quantum computers use qubits, which can hold multiple states simultaneously. That meant Enoch could simulate millions of potential reconstructions of a damaged scroll fragment, testing combinations of letters, words, and syntax, then instantly identify the most probable reading. This was critical because most of the scrolls aren't intact. Many are charred, broken, or incomplete. In some cases, only the curve of a letter remains. For humans, that's often a dead end. But for Enoch, it's a clue. It analyzes ink density, curvature, spacing, and parchment wear, and matches that information against a massive database of known scripts and scroll samples. The result? A reconstructed phrase, or sometimes an entire passage that might have otherwise stayed lost forever. But it wasn't just about filling in blanks. Enoch could read what the eye could not. Using multispectral imaging, researchers captured the scrolls under various wavelengths of light: infrared, ultraviolet, and beyond. These images revealed hidden ink traces deep in the parchment fibers. What once looked like blank space suddenly came alive with invisible writing. Enoch then reconstructed these signals into legible, meaningful text. Whole sections of scripture that had never been seen were recovered, some faint, others hidden behind burn marks or centuries of decay. Where scholars had to make judgment calls based on incomplete data, Enoch introduced a new approach: probabilistic interpretation. Rather than selecting a single translation or reconstruction, the AI presented ranked possibilities, each supported by hard data, syntax patterns, scribal trends, regional dialects, and ink analysis. Scholars could then explore multiple interpretations side by side, all grounded in evidence. This wasn't just smart, it was revolutionary. Enoch didn't work in isolation. It was connected to massive digital archives of ancient texts and archaeological data. It interfaced with linguistic models, historical timelines, and cultural references. When it encountered a rare word in a damaged passage, it checked whether similar phrasing had appeared in other scrolls, or even in texts found outside of Qumran, like in Babylonian or Egyptian manuscripts. One of the most astonishing feats of the system was its ability to recognize individual scribal hands. Every writer leaves a signature, however subtle. Enoch tracked tiny differences in stroke angles, letter spacing, and ink consistency to identify when different scrolls were written by the same person. This allowed scholars to group scrolls by author, revealing scribal networks that had previously gone unnoticed. In some cases, it even detected collaboration, multiple scribes contributing to the same manuscript, passing the pen back and forth across generations. It also spotted things humans missed for decades: overlooked symbols, marginal notations, palimpsests, texts written over older ones, and scratch marks that hinted at edits or redactions. Enoch brought these out from the shadows, revealing the editorial history of texts once thought to be static and unchanging. Even more importantly, Enoch was built to learn. With each scroll it analyzed, it improved, it refined its models, adjusted its language predictions, and cross-verified its previous conclusions. What began as a static tool became an evolving scholar in its own right, one that got smarter with every line it read. In labs and universities around the world, from Tel Aviv to Boston to Berlin, Enoch became an indispensable part of Dead Sea Scroll research. It accelerated timelines by years, connected long-separated fragments, and opened a deeper understanding of how ancient texts were composed, edited, and preserved. Scholars no longer talked about fragments as isolated mysteries. They talked about networks, timelines, motivations, and authorship. Thanks to Enoch, the scrolls were no longer just surviving relics. They were active voices, carefully preserved across time, now speaking in clarity after centuries of silence. Enoch didn't just interpret the past, it reconnected it. It gave ancient words back their breath. Dating breakthroughs and authorship. For years, the dating of the Dead Sea Scrolls rested on a fragile blend of paleography and educated guesswork. Scholars analyzed the way letters curled, how ink pooled at the end of strokes, or how lines were spaced on parchment. It was meticulous work, equal parts science and intuition, but it could only go so far. With no precise reference points, estimates varied wildly. The timeline of when these scrolls were written was never much more than an informed gamble. Then Enoch stepped in and blew the doors off. Enoch's breakthrough began with 24 fragments that had already been radiocarbon dated, the gold standard for determining the age of organic material. These served as training data. From them, Enoch learned to associate tiny, microscopic handwriting features with exact historical periods. It studied the way scribes formed letters, the pressure they applied, and how styles shifted over time. Patterns too subtle for the human eye to quantify, but easily parsed by a quantum-trained model. What it uncovered changed everything. Enoch was tested in blind trials. It correctly predicted scroll dates within a 30-year margin of radiocarbon-confirmed results, over 85% of the time. That kind of accuracy had never been seen before in manuscript studies. Scholars were stunned. It wasn't just accurate, it was consistent, objective, and scalable. But things got explosive when Enoch applied its model to two particularly well-known scrolls. 4. Q. Daniel C. and 4. Q. Koheleta, fragments from the biblical books of Daniel and Ecclesiastes. For decades, most scholars agreed that Daniel was written centuries after the events it describes. They believed it was retrospective, a political and religious commentary dressed as ancient prophecy, likely from the 2nd century BCE. Ecclesiastes, traditionally attributed to Solomon, was also thought to be written much later, centuries after Solomon's reign. Enoch said otherwise. It dates 4. Q. Daniel C. to the mid-160s BCE, the very time period the scroll depicts during the Maccabean revolt. This wasn't a copy. This was a contemporary account. It suggested that Daniel's prophecies weren't reflections of the past, but a live commentary on the present, and that changed how the entire book could be read. Then came 4th Q. Koheleta. Enoch placed it around 240 BCE, far earlier than most scholars had believed, yet still long after Solomon's time. This cast serious doubt on the tradition that Solomon himself wrote the book. Instead, it pointed to a much later author, drawing on royal legend or philosophy, and potentially connecting with Hellenistic ideas of the time. These weren't isolated shocks. Enoch's dating model, applied across hundreds of fragments, kept delivering unexpected results. Scrolls believed to have been copied by the Qumran community were found to predate the community's known existence. Others, assumed to be centuries removed from their subject matter, turned out to be nearly contemporaneous. This forced scholars to confront a radical idea. Maybe ancient Jews were writing and recording events in real time far more often than previously thought. The assumption had long been that oral traditions dominated, stories passed down for generations before eventually being written. But Enoch's findings challenged that. They suggested a scribal culture that was active, widespread, and much faster in committing events to text. It didn't stop there. As Enoch mapped out dates, it also started noticing textual echoes, phrases, sentence structures, and rhetorical flourishes that showed up across multiple scrolls written decades apart. In some cases, 2 scrolls separated by 70 years had sections that were word-for-word identical. That raised new questions. Were these scribes copying from a shared source? Was there a centralized set of teachings or traditions that circulated widely, even beyond Qumran? The consistency hinted at a coordinated scribal network, something closer to an early publishing infrastructure than an isolated desert sect. It suggested that what had once been seen as a fringe group preserving obscure beliefs might actually have been part of a broader intellectual and spiritual movement. Enoch even helped identify shared authorship across scrolls. Using its handwriting recognition capabilities, it confirmed that some scrolls, held in different museums, thought to be unrelated, were written by the same hand. In one case, it proved that a scribe had copied 2 different biblical texts years apart, suggesting a long career and possibly a community of scribes passing down knowledge from generation to generation. These insights shifted the scholarly landscape. Timelines were redrawn. Authorship theories collapsed. Entire narratives about how, when, and why these texts were written had to be reconsidered. For theologians and religious historians, the implications were seismic. If certain texts were older or newer than believed, what did that mean for their authority? For doctrine, how sacred tradition has been preserved, edited, or manipulated over time. Even more provocative, Enoch's data suggested some of these scrolls weren't just written earlier. They may have been written with the intent to survive. Carefully preserved, meticulously constructed, and in some cases, even encoded. These weren't scraps of chance. They were documents of design. In the end, the story wasn't just about dating texts. It was about rewriting what we thought we knew about authorship, transmission, and purpose. The scrolls weren't just the record of an ancient culture. They were the product of one, a conscious act of preservation meant for someone, someday, to find. Hidden codes and star maps. The Dead Sea Scrolls were always believed to be deeply symbolic and spiritual, but no one anticipated what quantum AI would reveal beneath the surface. Beyond the sacred texts, beyond the histories and laws, the AI uncovered something far stranger: evidence of structured codes, mathematical sequences, and astronomical knowledge hidden in plain sight. It started with anomalies. Enoch noticed that certain phrases, letter patterns, and number sequences repeated across scrolls in ways that defied explanation. These weren't liturgical refrains or poetic structures. They followed rules, specific, recurring numerical rules that looked eerily similar to modern encryption systems. When quantum AI ran statistical analyses, it identified the presence of prime number groupings, repetitive intervals, and binary-like patterns. In some cases, words were spaced or broken in consistent numeric rhythms. To modern cryptographers, these patterns resembled early forms of information encoding, techniques we use today in cybersecurity and quantum computing. But this wasn't just a mathematical coincidence. Quantum AI cross-referenced these sequences with known data from physics and ancient science. The structure wasn't random. It appeared intentional. It looked like the scribes had embedded information using a logic system lost to time. What was the purpose? Some researchers believe these codes were a form of safeguarding, a way to protect sacred knowledge from being misused or misunderstood. Others think they were memory aids for oral tradition. But a growing number suggest these patterns were meant to signal something deeper, that the texts weren't just written for religious preservation, but designed to survive until they could be decoded. The revelations didn't end there. Enoch also uncovered references to celestial events. Some scrolls contained calendar markings, astronomical calculations, and cryptic alignments with star patterns. One scroll described a solar anomaly that, when run through astronomical software, appeared to correspond with a real solar event recorded centuries later. Then came the biggest surprise. A series of symbols found in several scrolls matched positions on an ancient Chinese star map, one created over 2,000 years ago. The alignment wasn't symbolic, it was precise. Star positions, documented in the Han Dynasty, matched those encoded in Dead Sea texts. How could this be? The match raised impossible questions. Was there an ancient cross-cultural exchange between Jewish and Chinese scholars? Or were both cultures tapping into a shared, forgotten body of astronomical knowledge? The scrolls, already rich in religious meaning, now appeared to be part of a global, or even cosmic, dialogue. This discovery reignited debates about the nature of sacred texts. Were they only meant for worship? Or did they also function as encoded knowledge vaults? The presence of binary-like sequences and mathematical logic pointed to the latter. To explore further, researchers began treating the scrolls like computer code. They created simulations, fed textual data into neural networks, and ran encryption algorithms. Some results were startling. Fragments that once seemed chaotic now revealed structural coherence, as if they'd been designed with modular, code-like precision. Quantum AI, with its ability to model abstract possibilities, became essential. It helped researchers distinguish between random coincidence and real encryption. With every scroll processed, it uncovered more evidence that the ancients didn't just write, they engineered their texts. This raises uncomfortable questions. If the authors embedded messages meant for future decryption, what else might be waiting to be discovered? Was their information preserved intentionally for an era with tools advanced enough to decode it? And most chilling of all, what if we've only scratched the surface? The scrolls are no longer just historical or religious relics. They are puzzles, complex, encrypted, multi-layered messages that suggest their writers understood more about mathematics, astronomy, and even information theory than we ever imagined. Quantum AI hasn't just translated the past, it has opened a new kind of dialogue with it, one where prophecy, science, and cryptography are all part of the same hidden language. Controversies and reactions. The moment quantum AI began reconstructing the Dead Sea Scrolls, it lit a fuse, one that exploded far beyond the confines of academia. For some, Enoch was a miracle, a key that unlocked mysteries hidden for over 2,000 years. But for others, religious leaders, traditional scholars, cultural institutions, it was a threat. A machine rewriting sacred history, a cold algorithm deciphering divine texts. Not everyone was ready for what the scrolls were starting to reveal. Reactions were swift and divided. Some rabbis and priests welcomed the findings, believing Enoch's reconstructions validated the historical depth of scripture, but many others viewed the intrusion of AI into religious texts as sacrilege. "This is not interpretation," one senior rabbi in Jerusalem declared. "This is desecration." A Christian theologian warned of machines reinterpreting revelation, while an Islamic scholar questioned whether AI should be allowed to analyze Quranic manuscripts at all. The core fear was spiritual. What if AI misread what only the faithful were meant to understand? In academic circles, the backlash was no less intense, but for different reasons. Many historians and linguists had spent their careers building theories about the scrolls, timelines, translations, textual origins, based on manual analysis. Enoch's data upended much of that. Entire frameworks were invalidated in a matter of months. Some welcomed the disruption, others fought it. One university withdrew from a scroll dating project after Enoch contradicted its published published results, a prominent scholar publicly accused AI labs of historical arrogance. Behind the scenes, research teams competed for control of data pipelines. In at least 2 cases, access to digitized scroll fragments was restricted or delayed over disputes about ownership and interpretation. Conflicts weren't just academic, they were institutional. Museums housing scroll fragments began to argue over who had the right to release AI-generated reconstructions. Some claimed exclusive publication rights. Others feared backlash from religious groups if they published results that contradicted scripture. In private, curators confessed to redacting Enoch's interpretations before release to avoid public outcry. Then, there were the legal battles. If Enoch reconstructed a scroll based on fragment analysis, who owned that reconstruction? The institution holding the physical piece? The engineers who built the AI? The scholars who trained it? Copyright, intellectual property, and cultural heritage laws clashed in courtrooms and conferences worldwide. Governments got involved. Israel, home to most of the original finds, sought new international agreements to protect national cultural assets from being digitally reclaimed or altered by foreign research labs. Meanwhile, watchdog organizations warned that private tech companies, some working behind NDAs, were using sacred artifacts to train proprietary AI without public oversight. And as the debates raged, conspiracy theories exploded online. Anonymous accounts claimed the AI had found messages for the future buried in code, and that governments were suppressing these texts. Some said the Vatican was blocking access to reconstructions that challenged key dogmas. Others insisted Enoch had uncovered prophetic timelines pointing to modern events. None of this was proven, but the speculation was unstoppable. A global symposium was called, bringing together religious authorities, historians, cryptographers, AI ethicists, and museum directors. It didn't bring consensus, but it did surface the deeper, harder question at the heart of the uproar. Who controls the past? The scrolls were no longer inert artifacts. They were speaking, and now everyone wanted to decide who got to hear and who got to interpret what they said. One speaker put it plainly, "We are not just studying ancient texts anymore. We're arguing over the meaning of meaning itself and whether machines belong in that conversation." In the end, the scrolls sparked more than scholarly debate. They sparked a culture war, one where faith, science, and power collided. And while Enoch continued to decode the past, the world it emerged into was no longer unified in how or whether it wanted to hear what it had to say. Global research efforts. The effort to decode the Dead Sea Scrolls using AI didn't unfold in isolation. It quickly became one of the most collaborative archaeological and technological projects in modern history. Institutions across the globe, religious, academic, governmental, and corporate, joined forces to piece together a puzzle scattered across continents and millennia. Central to this work was the creation of large-scale digital databases. The Israel Antiquities Authority led the charge by launching a massive digitization initiative. Using high-resolution and multispectral imaging, they photographed thousands of scroll fragments, making them accessible through platforms like the Leon Levy Dead Sea Scrolls Digital Library. For the first time, anyone, from scholars to students, could zoom in on ancient ink from their laptops. Other countries followed suit. Universities in the US, Germany, the Netherlands, and South Korea launched their own AI-assisted scroll labs, working on everything from handwriting analysis to parchment reconstruction.
I worked on comparing the handwriting on these fragments that I found.
The once fragmented world of scroll research became a shared, open-source endeavor. One of the most exciting developments came from the Netherlands, where a team at the University of Groningen trained an AI to identify individual scribes by studying microscopic differences in how letters were formed, the angle of a stroke, the width of a curve. The software could distinguish between different hands on the same scroll. This revealed that texts once thought to be copied by a single author were often collaborative, hinting at an ancient, organized scribal tradition. Meanwhile, in the US, a consortium of universities used AI to match fragments separated by time and geography. Scroll pieces once housed in separate museums, or even private collections, were identified as belonging to the same manuscript. Some reconstructions connected fragments that had been apart for over 70 years. It was like watching torn pages from a book slowly reassemble themselves. In Israel, tech companies collaborated with government-backed heritage labs to improve multispectral imaging tools. These scanners uncovered faint, invisible ink traces on burned or faded parchment, which AI then used to reconstruct letters or even full phrases. Texts previously considered unreadable were suddenly brought back to life. The software didn't just focus on what was written, it also helped reconstruct the physical scrolls themselves. Machine learning models analyzed parchment shapes, tear patterns, and ink bleed to determine how fragments fit together. Researchers began using 3D rendering to digitally unroll scrolls that were too delicate to handle, giving scholars access to texts locked inside ancient bundles. As more countries joined the effort, international protocols were developed to share data securely and equitably. Translation projects launched across linguistic boundaries. AI-powered tools helped align Hebrew fragments with Greek and Aramaic counterparts, offering side-by-side comparisons. This allowed scholars to study how a story or law may have changed in translation. The collaboration extended beyond academia. Volunteers, hobbyist historians, and coders joined open-source scroll annotation platforms. In one case, a high school student in Canada helped flag a pattern of marginal markings that led to a major discovery about scribal formatting. Even the private sector found a role. IBM and Google contributed quantum computing infrastructure, while independent developers built lightweight tools to let smaller teams test AI reconstructions on their own machines. For perhaps the first time, the line between professional and citizen scholar blurred in biblical archaeology. But the greatest strength of this global effort wasn't just technological, it was philosophical. Institutions that once competed for exclusive rights and publication prestige now work together. A spirit of transparency took root, replacing secrecy with collaboration. Still, tensions remained. Some nations demanded repatriation of fragments held overseas. Others argued about intellectual property and access rights. Yet even amid these challenges, the collective momentum continued to grow. The reconstruction of the scrolls had become a shared mission. Each discovery, each matched fragment, each newly translated line wasn't just a win for one lab or one scholar. It was a step closer to understanding one of the greatest literary and spiritual legacies ever unearthed. The Dead Sea Scrolls may have been written in desert caves 2,000 years ago, but their restoration is now a global act, a convergence of science, faith, and cooperation unlike anything seen before. Deeper themes and questions raised. For decades, the Dead Sea Scrolls were treated as relics, fragments of parchment frozen in time, a snapshot of a long-vanished culture. They were cataloged, translated, debated, and slotted neatly into the frameworks of religion and history. But the arrival of quantum AI has shattered that stability. These ancient texts are no longer passive artifacts. They've become dynamic, layered, and unpredictable, alive in a way that scholars never anticipated. The decoding of the scrolls with advanced AI has done more than recover missing passages or settle historical disputes. It has forced humanity to confront deeper, more unsettling questions, not just about the past, but about what we believe, how we establish truth, and whether some knowledge was meant to remain hidden. Until recently, the scrolls were approached as straightforward religious documents, laws, hymns, commentaries, sectarian rules. Yet as AI systems dig beneath the surface, a new picture is emerging. The writers were not merely legalists or priests. They were philosophers, cosmologists, mathematicians, and strategists. Their worldview was not one of separation between faith and science, but of integration. Astronomy, encoded mathematics, and symbolic structures weave together with theology and law. What looked like scripture is beginning to resemble something more, an encrypted manual of wisdom. That realization carries profound implications. If ancient Jewish sects were blending scientific inquiry with spiritual thought, then our assumptions about the limits of their intellectual world collapse. The boundary between religious devotion and esoteric knowledge grows blurry. Suddenly, concepts once thought to belong to the medieval Kabbalists or early Gnostics show primitive forms in texts written nearly 2,000 years earlier. Mysticism, cosmology, and coded philosophy were not late innovations. They may have been present at the very origins of the tradition. The natural question follows: who was meant to read these encrypted ideas? Were they intended only for a select few, the initiated, the elites, the guardians of secret knowledge? Were they warnings meant for future generations? Or were they safeguards designed to hide dangerous concepts from authorities who would suppress or destroy them? This is no longer just a matter of theology. If AI can expose hidden layers in texts that experts studied for decades without seeing, what else might be waiting? What other sacred or historical works from Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, or Greece contain hidden mathematical or symbolic frameworks? Entire civilizations may have encoded their knowledge in ways that only now, with quantum computing, are becoming legible. But here we run into an ethical wall. Should machines be allowed to interpret spiritual texts? Is it appropriate for algorithms to peel back layers of meaning that may have been intentionally obscured? At what point does the study of history become the violation of sacred space? These are no longer hypothetical questions. They are immediate, contested, and emotionally charged. Different communities are arriving at very different answers. To some, the work of AI decoding systems, nicknamed Enoch by one research team, is a miracle of the modern age. They see it as a bridge between science and faith, past and future, revelation and reason. For others, it is desecration, a profaning of texts that were never meant to be reduced to data and algorithms. And then there is the strangest question of all: why now? After 2 millennia buried in the caves of Qumran, are the scrolls yielding their secrets in an era defined by quantum computing and artificial intelligence? Is this simply progress? Technology doing what technology does? Or does it suggest something deeper? Some theologians have whispered that the scrolls were designed to remain opaque until humanity reached a certain stage of maturity, whether intellectual, spiritual, or technological. The idea borders on science fiction, yet serious academics are entertaining it because the timing feels uncanny. If that speculation is true, then the scrolls may not be random scraps of ancient writing. They could be deliberate messages, carefully crafted, intentionally hidden, waiting for the future to arrive. That possibility reframes everything. What AI is uncovering is not just forgotten history, it is forbidden knowledge, buried context that reshapes doctrines, destabilizes traditions, and bends long-standing narratives. The scrolls are not merely telling us what happened 2,000 years ago. They are forcing us to ask why those ideas were concealed and what it means to unearth them now. The consequences ripple outward. Already, decoded fragments suggest patterns in astronomy that align eerily with modern observations. Others hint at symbolic systems that prefigure later mystical traditions. Each revelation challenges the assumption that the ancients were naive, pre-scientific, or limited in scope. Instead, they appear as intellectual pioneers, embedding wisdom into code, writing across the centuries to an audience they could only imagine. And the story is far from finished. The final message of the scrolls is still being written, not by the scribes of Qumran, but by us, with machines that can see what human eyes cannot. For the first time, the Dead Sea Scrolls are not just historical artifacts. They are messages from the edge of time, part scripture, part science, part encrypted philosophy. They remind us that the past is not fixed, that truth is not simple, and that knowledge always carries a weight, sometimes enlightening, sometimes dangerous, always transformative. And perhaps the greatest revelation is this: in decoding the scrolls, we are not just learning about an ancient people. We are being confronted with ourselves, our hunger for knowledge, our fear of its consequences, and our willingness to break open mysteries that may have been left sealed for a reason. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed this, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss what's next. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. Stay curious, stay inspired, and we'll see you in the next adventure.